In the blood-soaked soil of Cheroneia, in the year 338 BC, an entire army lay dead. 300 of them. Not just soldiers, but an elite force, the pride of the city of Thebes. They were known as the Sacred Band, and what made them sacred, what supposedly made them invincible, was that they were composed entirely of 150 pairs of male lovers. They fell together, fighting to the last man, a testament to a love so powerful. It supposedly conquered the fear of death itself. Philip II of Macedon, the man whose forces had just slaughtered them, stood over their bodies, and is said to have wept, declaring, "Perish any man who suspects that these men either did or suffered anything shameful." A beautiful, tragic end to a beautiful story. A story of ideal love. Except it's not. This isn't the beginning of a romance. This is the end of an illusion. And the story of these 300 dead lovers isn't a testament to a golden age of acceptance. It's the final, bloody punctuation mark on a truth, far more complex, far more brutal, and far more terrifying than the sanitized version of history we've been sold. The story of same-sex love in ancient Greece is not a story of utopia. It's a story of power, of violence, and of a carefully constructed ideal that, for many, was a living nightmare. And to understand it, we have to start not on the battlefield, but in the minds of the men who invented it. Imagine Athens in its golden age. The sun warms the white marble of the Parthenon. In the bustling agora, men in flowing robes gather to debate, to trade, and to philosophize. Here, in the cradle of democracy, another concept was being born and perfected, a specific, highly structured form of love between an adult man and an adolescent boy. This wasn't a secret. It wasn't hidden in shadows. It was discussed openly, written about, and even celebrated as the highest form of affection, far superior to the vulgar, procreative business conducted with women. This was pederasty, from the Greek words posarts, boy, and erast pots, lover. To understand the ideal, you must listen to the men who championed it, men like Plato. In his famous dialogue, the Symposium, a group of Athens' brightest minds gather for a dinner party, and the topic of the night is Eros, the god of love. Speaker after speaker gets up to praise it, but they are almost exclusively praising the love between a man and a boy. For them, this was the purest love. A love of the soul, not just the body. The older man, the Zontarastes Pont, was meant to be a mentor. He would see the potential for beauty and virtue in a youth. The Soteromenos taught, and through his love and guidance, he would educate the boy in matters of philosophy, politics and war. He would shape him into a perfect citizen. The boy, in return, would offer his admiration, his devotion, and his youthful beauty, inspiring the older man to be his best self. It was a heavenly ladder. The love for a beautiful boy was the first rung, leading a man to love all beautiful bodies, then beautiful souls, then beautiful ideas, until he finally glimpsed the ultimate, divine form of beauty itself. It was a love that promised to make men godlike. This ideal was everywhere. It was woven into the very fabric of their mythology. The king of the gods, Zeus, fell in love with a mortal boy, the Trojan prince Ganymede. He didn't woo him with gifts. He transformed into a giant eagle, snatched the boy from the fields where he tended his sheep, and carried him off to Mount Olympus. There, Ganymede would be his immortal cupbearer, serving the gods for eternity. This wasn't seen as a kidnapping. It was portrayed as the ultimate honor, a mortal boy, so beautiful that the king of the gods himself desired him, and granted him eternal life. The story was painted on vases, sung about in poems. It was the divine stamp of approval on the attraction of a powerful, older male for a beautiful youth. Then there was the greatest hero of them all, Achilles. His bond with Patroclus in the Sotiliad Sot is one of the most intense and passionate relationships in all of Western literature. When Patroclus is killed, Achilles is not just sad, he is destroyed. He throws himself on the ground, covers himself in dirt and ash, and lets out a cry so terrible his mother hears him from the depths of the sea. He loses the will to live, caring for nothing but vengeance. He declares he wishes that all the other Greeks and Trojans would die, so that he and Patroclus alone could conquer Troy. When he finally gets his revenge, he holds elaborate funeral games for his beloved, and, in the end, requests that their bones be mixed together in the same golden urn, so they can be together for all eternity. Were they lovers? Homer doesn't explicitly say so, but later Greeks, from Plato to Aeschylus, had absolutely no doubt. To them, Achilles and Patroclus were the ultimate example of the heroic bond between Ansantarastes, Wantan and Santarastes, and Ansantaromenos Dant. It was the engine of their glory. This was the sales pitch. A love that made you a better man, a better citizen, a better warrior. A love that could lead you to the gods. A love that was sanctioned by myth and enshrined in philosophy. Who wouldn't want that? It sounds ideal. But ideals, like marble statues, look perfect from a distance. It's only when you get closer that you start to see the cracks. No, let's step out of the philosophical haze of the dinner party and into the harsh light of Athenian law and social reality. This ideal love was not a free for all. It was governed by a labyrinth of unwritten rules and very real legal threats. It was less a field of flowers and more a minefield of social disgrace. For starters, it was a one-way street of desire. The Cytarastes, the older man, was expected to be the pursuer, the one driven by desire. The Santaromenos Dant, the boy, was not supposed to desire back. His role was to be modestly reluctant, to be won over not by lust, but by the virtue and wisdom of his suitor. If a boy appeared too eager, or worse, if he seemed to take physical pleasure in the act, he was considered effeminate and shameful. The ideal was a chaste pursuit, with any physical expression being a secondary, almost regrettable consequence. The goal was the boy's mind, not his body at least. That was the official story. The timeline was also brutally specific. The relationship was only acceptable when the Santaromenos Dant was a teenager, after he'd grown his first facial hair. But before he was a full adult citizen. Before that, it was taboo. After that, it was a disgrace. A grown man continuing in the submissive role of an Santaromenos Dant would be an object of public ridicule. The social choreography was dizzying. The Santarastes font would court the boy publicly, at the gymnasium or the academy. He would write him poems, give him gifts. But the gifts had to be appropriate. A fighting cock, a hare, something related to the aristocratic pursuits of sport and war, giving a boy money. That was a disaster. That turned the noble, philosophical pursuit into something else entirely: prostitution. And that's where the law stepped in, with teeth. One of Athens's earliest lawgivers, Solon, enacted laws concerning pederasty. On the one hand, he seemed to protect it, forbidding slaves from participating in these relationships, thus making it an exclusive privilege of free citizens. But he also put up walls. He passed laws to protect freeborn boys from being assaulted or prostituted, with severe penalties for offenders. It was a system of contradictions. It was celebrated in philosophy, yet policed by law. It was a public performance, yet fraught with private danger. It was supposed to be about the soul, but everyone was obsessed with the body. And the most dangerous contradiction of all lay in that distinction between love and money. A boy who gave his affection to a virtuous mentor was on the path to becoming a good man. A boy who sold it, for any reason, was something else. He was a pornos, and in the cutthroat world of Athenian politics, that label could be a death sentence for your entire future. A young man accused of having prostituted himself as a boy could be stripped of his citizen rights. He would be barred from speaking in the assembly, from serving as a magistrate, from bringing a lawsuit. He would become a non-person, his public life over before it had even begun. This wasn't just a social faux pas, it was a weapon. A political tool of catastrophic power, and it's in the story of one man, a man named Timarchus, that we see the beautiful philosophical ideals smashed to pieces by the brutal reality of power, politics and shame. Let's move from the abstract to the specific, from Plato's beautiful theories to the terrifying, real-world case of a man whose life was systematically dismantled in a public courtroom because of who he loved, or who he was paid to love, as a boy. The year is 346 BC. The man on trial is Timarchus, but he's not on trial for theft or murder. His prosecutor, a brilliant orator named Aeschines, is trying to use a law to silence him, to strip him of his right to speak in the assembly, to effectively end his political career. The charge, that years ago when Timarchus was a youth, he had been a prostitute, that he had sold his body to other men for money. Aeschines' speech, Patagens Timarchus Timarchus Sat, survives to this day. and it is one of the most chilling documents from the ancient world. It is a masterclass in character assassination. It rips away the veil of philosophical pederasty and exposes the raw, ugly mechanics of power and sexual hypocrisy that lay beneath. Aeschines doesn't stand up and condemn same-sex attraction. He can't. Everyone in the courtroom, the jury of hundreds of Athenian citizens, would have understood and likely participated in the system of pederasty. So he performs a brilliant rhetorical move. He praises the good kind of love, the noble, chaste, educational bond between a virtuous Dontarastes taunt and a modest Dontaromenos taunt. He holds up the heroes, Achilles and Patroclus, as the shining example. He says, "For you are not unaware that the love of good men for beautiful and modest boys is a source of friendship and virtue." He's saying, I'm one of you, I get it. And then, having established that common ground, he pivots. He begins to paint a portrait of Timarchus, not as a beloved Stontaromenos got in a noble relationship, but as a degenerate, greedy youth who sold himself to the highest bidder. He brings up witnesses. He names names. He describes lavish spending, trips abroad, clothes and luxuries that a young man of Timarchus's means could never afford. He asks the jury, where did the money come from? The implication is clear and poisonous. He describes one of Timarchus's alleged keepers, a man named Miscolus, as a degenerate who collected boys like trinkets, someone known for his shameful passions. Aeschines isn't just accusing Timarchus of having sex with men. He is accusing him of having the Sontron kind of sex, with the Zontron kind of men, for the Sontron kind of men, for the Sontron reasons. He's turning the accepted social practice into a weapon. He tells the jury, I ask you, men of Athens, which of you would want your son to be like Timarchus? To have his beauty praised, yes, but for a price. He is tapping into a deep well of anxiety. The fear that the line between honorable mentorship and sordid transaction was terrifyingly thin. The fear that your own son, engaged in what you believed was a normal part of his education, could be corrupted. He is not just prosecuting Timarchus, he is putting the entire system on trial and forcing the jury to pick a side. What is so gruesome about this story is not physical violence, but the surgical precision of the social and psychological violence. Imagine being Timarchus, sitting there in a public court, while a master orator lays bare the most intimate, and possibly fabricated, details of your youth. Your relationships, your sexuality, twisted into a narrative of greed and depravity for political gain. And the most terrifying part, we have no idea what the truth was. Was Timarchus a political prostitute? Or was he simply a young man who had a lover who was generous with his money? Does it even matter? The line was so blurry, so dependent on interpretation and reputation, that an accusation was as good as a conviction. The ideal of Plato's Symposium sought, that love for a boy leads to divine beauty, is nowhere to be found in that courtroom. Here, love for a boy leads to public ruin, and this brings us to the most profound silence in this entire historical narrative. The voice of the Sontaromenos stont. The boy himself. We have volumes of text from the Tontarastai. We have Plato and Aeschines, and countless others telling us what they thought, what they desired, what the rules were from their perspective. They are the writers, the philosophers, the politicians. They hold the pen, the boys. They are the objects of the poems, the subjects of the debate. They are the beautiful silent statues in the center of the room. What did they actually feel? We are told they were supposed to feel admiration, gratitude. They were supposed to be modestly reluctant. But were they? When a powerful, wealthy, 40-year-old citizen set his sights on a 15-year-old boy from a less influential family, how much choice did that boy really have? When his family's social standing, his own future prospects, could be elevated by accepting the advances of a powerful mentor, was it truly a free choice? Or was it an obligation dressed up in the language of honor? For every boy who genuinely admired his mentor and benefited from the relationship, how many were there who were simply scared? Who felt used? Who endured unwanted advances because they knew the social cost of refusal was too high? We will never know. Their voices are lost to history. They didn't write the speeches or the philosophical dialogues. All we have is the overwhelming evidence of a power imbalance, so vast it strains the modern definition of consent. The ideal love of ancient Greece was an ideal created by, and for, the powerful. It was a system that centered the desires, the ambitions, and the philosophical justifications of the adult male citizen. The boy was a beautiful, necessary, but ultimately disposable, part of his benefactor's journey towards self-improvement. And if this was the complex and often predatory reality for boys, who were at least visible and whose relationships were part of the public discourse, what was the reality for the other half of the population? What was the truth for the women, if the world of male same-sex relationships was a complex web of rules and power? The world of female same-sex relationships in ancient Greece was a near-total void, a black hole of historical silence. And when a voice did manage to cry out, it was often met with ridicule or condemnation. To find any evidence, we have to travel from the bustling male-dominated city of Athens to a different island, a different culture, Lesbos, and to a different voice, the poet Sappho. Sappho is perhaps the most famous female poet of the ancient world. Her words, surviving only in tantalizing fragments, speak of an intense, emotional, and physical world of women. She writes of her desire for other women with a startling directness. "He seems to me equal to the gods," she writes, describing a man sitting with a woman she desires. "But when I look at you for a moment, I can no longer speak. My tongue is broken. A thin flame runs under my skin. I see nothing with my eyes. My ears are roaring." This is not the cold, philosophical language of Plato. This is the raw, physical language of passion. Her poems are filled with the names of young women in her circle: Anactoria, Atthis, Gongula. She speaks of their beauty, of her longing for them when they are gone, of the jealousy she feels. For centuries, people have tried to explain this away. They claimed she was a headmistress of a finishing school, preparing girls for marriage, and these were just sentimental, poetic addresses. Others, seeking to erase the shame, invented a story that she committed suicide by leaping from a cliff for the love of a man. But the words on the papyrus are undeniable. Sappho loved women. Her island, Lesbos, has given us the very word we use today. But was Sappho's world a lesbian paradise, an island of freedom in a sea of patriarchy? The truth is likely more complicated. The society on Lesbos was different from Athens. Women seemed to have more freedom, more education, and more social agency. It is possible that these intense, loving relationships between women and girls were an accepted, even celebrated, part of life, perhaps before marriage, a temporary, liminal space where female desire was allowed to flourish. But Sappho's world was the exception, not the rule. Back in Athens, the situation was completely different. An Athenian citizen woman lived a life of seclusion. Her entire purpose was to be married, to remain chaste for her husband, and to produce legitimate male heirs. Her world was the home. Her interactions with men who were not her relatives were severely limited. In this context, a woman expressing sexual desire for anyone, let alone another woman, was unthinkable. It was a threat to the entire social order, which was built on clear lines of patriarchal inheritance. While male homosexuality was integrated into the civic and military education of the elite, female homosexuality had no place. It served no purpose in the male imagination. And when it was imagined, it was as an object of comedy or disgust. In the plays of the comic poet Aristophanes, women who have sex with other women are called tribades. They are portrayed as mannish, aggressive, and sexually insatiable, a grotesque parody of masculinity. They are a joke. In one fragment of a lost play, a character asks, "Will you get yourself a girlfriend to be your little snake?" It's a line meant to get a laugh from the all-male audience, a laugh of derision at something considered unnatural and absurd. We also have ancient medical texts that try to pathologize it, claiming that these women had abnormally large clitorises, effectively making them a monstrous third sex. They weren't just women loving women, they were anatomical freaks, failed men. The contrast is stark and devastating. For men, same-sex desire, when properly channeled, was a path to virtue and divinity. For women, it was a joke, a medical anomaly, or a silent, invisible crime against the social order. There was no Plato writing at Symposium Sat about the beauty of lesbian love. There were no statues of female heroes and their beloveds. There was only Sappho, a singular brilliant flame on a distant island. And then, for the most part, a crushing, dismissive silence. The ideal love of the Greeks was an exclusively male and profoundly misogynistic ideal. It not only exploited boys, It completely erased women. And this brings us back to where we started. Back to that field of blood, back to those 300 dead men. Let's stand again on the battlefield of Chaeronea. The year is 338 BC. The Sacred Band of Thebes, the elite force of 150 pairs of lovers, has been annihilated by the Macedonian phalanx of Philip II and his young son, Alexander. We are told they fought with superhuman bravery, that each man stood his ground to protect his beloved, that they chose to die together rather than retreat. Plutarch, writing centuries later, gives us the classic interpretation. For a band cemented by friendship grounded upon love is never to be broken. It's a powerful romantic image. It's the perfect real world embodiment of Plato's philosophical ideal. Plato himself had argued that an army of lovers would be invincible, because who would show cowardice in front of the one they loved? The Sacred Band seems to be the proof. But now, with everything we know about the complexities, the power dynamics and the hypocrisy of the Greek system, we have to ask a different set of questions. Was the Sacred Band truly an army of ideal lovers? Or was it something else? Was it a brilliant piece of military engineering that weaponized an existing social structure? Thebes, just like Athens and Sparta, practiced institutionalized pederasty. The relationships within the Sacred Band would have mirrored that structure. An older, experienced warrior, the Sontarastes, paired with a younger, junior partner, the Sontaromenos. The bond was not just emotional, it was hierarchical. It was a chain of command built on a framework of love, mentorship, and social obligation. The younger soldier wasn't just fighting for a lover, he was fighting for his commander, his mentor, the man who was shaping his career as a warrior. The older soldier wasn't just protecting his beloved, he was protecting his property, his legacy, his investment. Does this make their bravery any less real? The courage it took to stand against the Macedonian war machine is undeniable. But it does change the Dont or High Taunt. It shifts the narrative from a simple romantic story of love conquers all to a more complex story of a society that had perfected the art of binding its fighting men together through a powerful cocktail of love, honor, ambition, and social pressure. The love was real, but it was also a tool of the state. And the story of the Sacred Band becomes even more poignant when we realize they were an anomaly. They were not the norm across Greece. They were a specific institution, from a specific city, during a specific period of military innovation. They were an experiment, and at Chaeronea, the experiment failed. Their love, however powerful, could not stop the pikes of the Macedonian phalanx. Their devotion could not stop the relentless march of history. And so, the image of Philip of Macedon weeping over their bodies takes on a new meaning. Perhaps he was not weeping for the death of an ideal love. Perhaps he was weeping at the sight of such perfectly engineered loyalty, such potent devotion, utterly destroyed. He was seeing the wreckage of the very best his enemies had to offer. A fighting force forged in the fires of a uniquely Greek institution. The story of the Sacred Band is not proof that ancient Greece was a haven of acceptance. If anything, their uniqueness proves the opposite. They stand out precisely because they were so unusual. Their ultimate fate, slaughtered to the last man, serves as a brutal metaphor for the fate of the ideal itself. It was beautiful. It was powerful. It inspired great things. But in the end, it was fragile. And the beautiful story that was built around it, the story of a perfect and ideal love, was used to obscure a much messier and more painful truth for everyone who didn't fit neatly into the role of a powerful Sontarastes pawn. The ideal love was a gilded cage for the boys who had to navigate its predatory rules, for the women who were completely written out of its script, and even for the men of the Sacred Band, whose love was harnessed, weaponized, and ultimately led them to their deaths on a forgotten field in Boeotia. The ideal was, in the end, a lie. A beautiful, philosophical, and incredibly useful lie. So where does this leave us? We are left with a history that is far more complicated, and frankly, more interesting than the simple myths we've inherited. The story of same-sex relationships in ancient Greece is not a simple morality play with clear heroes and villains. It's a story of contradictions. It's a society that could produce Plato's taught Symposium, one of the most sublime texts on love ever written, and at the same time produce Aeschines' brutal, homophobic prosecution of Timarchus. It's a culture that could celebrate the divine love of Zeus for Ganymede, while scorning real women who loved other women as unnatural jokes. It's a world that could create an army of lovers like the Sacred Band, and then watch them be slaughtered. To look back at ancient Greece and see a simple gay paradise is to willfully ignore the vast power imbalances, the exploitation, the coercion, and the misogyny that were baked into the very system. It's to ignore the silent voices of the deuteronomoi and the complete erasure of women. It's to pick the prettiest parts of the story while ignoring the blood on the floor. Conversely, to look back and see only abuse and predation is to ignore the genuine affection, the deep bonds, and the philosophical and artistic heights that these relationships, for a select few, clearly inspired. It's to dismiss the very real courage of the Sacred Band and the undeniable passion in Sappho's poetry. The truth, as always, is messier. It lives in the grey spaces between the ideal and the reality. The ancient Greeks were not like us. Their world was profoundly different, with different ethics, different social structures, and different ideas about the very nature of love, desire, and the self. Trying to claim them as a simple historical precedent for modern LGBTQ rights is a historical disservice. It forces their complex reality into our modern boxes, and it glosses over the parts of their world that were deeply unjust. What we can learn from them is not a simple lesson of tolerance. It is a more profound and cautionary tale. It's a story about how any society can create a beautiful ideal, a powerful story about love and virtue, and then use that very ideal to justify, control, and oppress. It's a warning about the seductive power of beautiful ideas, and a reminder to always ask, who benefits from this story, and more importantly, whose story is not being told. The truth about ancient Greece is not that they were wonderfully progressive or terribly barbaric. It's that they were human. They were brilliant, and they were brutal. They created breathtaking beauty, and they enforced breathtaking cruelty. And their ideal love, in all its glory and all its horror, is not a model to be copied, but a complex, challenging, and deeply human story that we must strive to understand in its entirety, without the comfort of easy answers.